Hello there, wonderful listeners. Welcome back to English with Billy, the podcast where we could learn English through interesting ideas. I'm your host, Billy, and today we're going to talk about something we all experience but rarely notice: how we form social groups and why we sometimes dislike people who are different from us. Before we start, remember that all the vocabulary for today's episode is on our website at englishwithbilly.com. And if you're new here, don't worry, I speak clearly and explain difficult words. If you need to, you can always pause and replay parts that are challenging. Today's episode is inspired by the ideas of a brilliant writer named Scott Alexander, who wrote a fascinating essay about how we form groups in society. I'm going to explain these ideas in a way that I hope is easy to understand using stories and examples. Let me start with a story that happened to me last year. I was at a coffee shop working on my laptop when I noticed two people at the next table having what seemed like a friendly conversation. They were discussing movies, music, and their favorite restaurants, nodding and smiling at each other's opinions. Then somehow, the topic changed to politics, and suddenly it was like they were speaking different languages. Their faces changed, their voices got louder, and they started interrupting each other. Within 5 minutes, they paid their bills and left, separately. What happened there? How could these two people get along so well 1 minute and then become almost enemies the next? That's what we're going to explore today. Let's start with an important word for today: outgroup. An outgroup is basically any group of people that you don't belong to or identify with. The opposite is your in-group, the people you feel connected to and similar to. Now, you might think your outgroup would be people who are very different from you. For example, if you're from Brazil, maybe people from Japan would be your outgroup because they live far away and have a different culture. But here's something interesting. Often, our strongest negative feelings aren't toward people who are completely different from us. Instead, we often have the strongest reactions to people who are almost like us, but differ in one important way. Let me give you an example. Imagine two neighbors who are both soccer fans, both have families, both work hard at similar jobs, but one supports Manchester United and the other supports Liverpool. Even though these neighbors are similar in almost every way, their different soccer teams might cause more arguments between them than with someone who doesn't care about soccer at all. This happens because the small differences feel more important when everything else is similar. It's like when brothers and sisters fight. They're from the same family, but still argue with each other. Now, let's talk about forgiveness. This is something I find really fascinating. Imagine your friend tells you, "I'm such a forgiving person. Yesterday, someone offered me chocolate ice cream, but I don't like chocolate ice cream. Still, I forgave them." Would you be impressed? Probably not, because it's easy to forgive something that doesn't bother you in the first place. True forgiveness is when something actually hurts or upsets you, but you choose to move past it anyway. It's like if someone accidentally broke your favorite mug, that requires real forgiveness. Saying you forgive something that didn't hurt you isn't really forgiveness at all. The same thing happens with tolerance. Many people say, "I'm so tolerant. I accept people who are exactly like me." But that's not tolerance, that's just normal. Real tolerance is accepting people whose views or behaviors you actually disagree with. Now let's get into something really interesting. In many countries, especially the United States, society is divided into what we might call tribes. These aren't traditional tribes with different clothes or languages, but groups of people who share similar values, opinions, and lifestyles. In America, Scott Alexander describes two main tribes, the Red Tribe and the Blue Tribe. These names come from the colors used to represent Republicans, red, and Democrats, blue, on election maps. Let me describe these tribes for you. Remember, these are generalizations, and not everyone fits perfectly into either group. The Red Tribe tends to be more conservative and traditional. They often live in suburban or rural areas. They might enjoy watching football, going to church, eating steaks, driving big cars, and listening to country music. They're usually very patriotic and proud of their country. The Blue Tribe tends to be more liberal and progressive. They often live in cities. They might enjoy reading books, trying international foods, driving fuel-efficient cars, caring about environmental issues, and listening to a variety of music except country. They might be more critical of their country, saying things like, "We should be more like Europe." Now, here's what's really fascinating. Even though these two tribes live in the same country, they have become so separated that they barely interact with each other. It's like they live in parallel universes. Let me tell you another personal story. A few years ago, I was at a dinner party in New York City with about 15 people. Someone mentioned a recent political event, and everyone started talking about it. After about 20 minutes, I realized something strange. Everyone at the table had exactly the same opinion. All 15 people agreed completely on this complex political issue. Now, statistically, that's very unusual. In America, opinions on most political issues are divided, maybe 60 to 40 or 70 to 30. So, in a random group of 15 Americans, you would expect at least a few people to have different views. But in this group, there was 100% agreement. This shows how separated these tribes have become. Many people now live, work, and socialize only with people who think like them. They watch different news channels, read different websites, live in different neighborhoods, and even eat at different restaurant chains. Alexander gives an amazing example. He says he knows about 150 people personally, and based on national statistics, about 46% of Americans believe in creationism, the idea that God created humans exactly as they are now. So, out of 150 random Americans, about 70 should be creationists. But in his social circle, 0, not a single one. The chances of this happening randomly would be like picking one specific atom out of all the atoms on Earth. That's how separated these groups have become. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Research shows that people's biases against the other tribe are actually stronger than other types of bias, like racial bias. In one study, researchers sent out fake job applications. Some had names that sounded like they came from white people, and others had names that sounded like they came from black people. This is a common way to test for racial bias. But the researchers also did something else. They mentioned the applicants' political activities. Some were members of Democratic clubs, and others were members of Republican clubs. What they found was surprising. The difference in callback rates between Democratic and Republican applicants was bigger than the difference between white and black applicants. In other words, political tribalism was stronger than racial bias in this experiment. Think about that for a minute. People were more likely to discriminate based on someone's political views than on their race. Let me give you another example from my own life that shows how these tribes work. A few years ago, I was at a dinner with friends when someone mentioned the death of a famous, controversial political figure. One person at the table said, "I'm glad they're dead. The world is better without them." I was shocked by this comment, and I said, "Isn't it wrong to celebrate anyone's death, no matter who they are?" The person looked at me and said, "Oh, I bet you didn't say that when a terrorist leader died." And you know what? They were right. I hadn't said that when the terrorist died. I had felt relief, maybe even a little satisfaction, but I didn't feel the same way about the politician's death, even though both people had caused harm in the world. Why? Because one was associated with my tribe and one wasn't. The terrorist was an acceptable person to dislike, but the politician was part of a group that many of my friends identified with. This is how tribal thinking affects us all. We apply different standards to different groups, often without even realizing it. Here's another fascinating observation. When we criticize our own group, it feels uncomfortable. It's hard to do. You might feel like you're betraying your team or family. But many people claim to be self-critical while actually criticizing their outgroup in disguise. For example, imagine someone says, "I hate how we Americans are so ignorant about the world." That sounds like self-criticism, right? But often, the person saying this actually means, "I hate how those other Americans, the ones not like me, are so ignorant about the world." It's a way of criticizing your outgroup while appearing to be humble and self-aware. But true self-criticism should feel difficult and uncomfortable, like admitting a personal flaw to a close friend. Now, let's talk about something interesting about language. Have you noticed how certain words can act as code for something else? When people use words like American or white, they sometimes aren't talking about all Americans or all white people. They're often using these words as code for a specific subgroup. For example, if someone says, "Americans love guns and fast food," they probably don't mean all Americans. There are millions of Americans who don't like guns and don't eat fast food. What they really mean is, a certain type of American loves guns and fast food. This happens with many group labels. When people say gamers or urban youth or coastal elites, they often have a very specific stereotype in mind, not the literal definition of those words. This is important to understand because it helps explain why some conversations about groups become so confusing. People might be using the same words, but talking about completely different things. I want to tell you a story from my childhood that helps illustrate how tribes form. When I was about 12 years old, my family moved to a new neighborhood. On our street, there were two groups of kids who were always fighting with each other. At first, I couldn't understand why they disliked each other so much. They all went to the same school, played the same sports, and liked the same video games. The only difference I could see was that one group lived on the north end of the street and the other group lived on the south end. But that small difference was enough. Each group had created an identity based on which part of the street they lived on, and they found reasons to dislike the other group. This is exactly how many adult tribes work too. We find small differences: which TV shows we watch, what foods we eat, what news channels we prefer, and we build entire identities around them. Then we find reasons to dislike the other group. So, what can we learn from all this? How can understanding these tribal dynamics help us? First, it helps us recognize our own biases. We all have them. I certainly do. When I catch myself thinking, how could anyone believe that? About a political issue, I try to remember that smart, good people can have different views based on their experiences and values. Second, it helps us become truly tolerant. Real tolerance isn't about accepting people who are already like us. It's about respecting people who are different from us in meaningful ways, people we genuinely disagree with. Third, it helps us communicate better. When we understand that different groups use language differently, we can clarify what we mean and avoid talking past each other. Let me leave you with one more personal story. Last year, I decided to challenge myself by spending time with people from the other tribe, people with very different political views than mine. I joined a community group in my town that I knew would have people with diverse opinions. The first few meetings were uncomfortable. I heard viewpoints that bothered me. I wanted to argue and prove why I was right. But instead, I tried to listen. I asked questions like, how did you come to that conclusion? And what experiences shaped your view on this? And you know what happened? I didn't change my core values, but I did gain a better understanding of why good, intelligent people might see the world differently than I do. I found that many of my assumptions about those people were wrong. They weren't ignorant or hateful. They just had different priorities and concerns. This doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. It doesn't even mean we'll become friends with everyone from the other tribe. But understanding tribal dynamics helps us see each other as people first, not just as members of an opposing team. Before we end today's episode, let's review some of the English vocabulary we've learned. 1. Outgroup. People who are not part of your social group. 2. In-group. People who are part of your social group. 3. Tolerance. Accepting or respecting views or behaviors you disagree with. 4. Tribalism. Strong loyalty to your own social group. 5. Bias. Unfair preference for or against a person or group. 6. Discrimination. Treating someone differently based on their group identity. 7. Generalization. A broad statement about a group that may not apply to everyone. 8. Stereotype. A fixed, oversimplified image of a particular type of person. That's all for today's episode of English with Billy. I hope you enjoyed our discussion about social tribes and how they shape our thinking. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave a review. It helps other English learners find us. Until next time, keep practicing your English and remember to be curious about different perspectives. This is Billy, signing off.